Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's Candidate ID Talent Talk. My name is Billy McDiarmid. I'm the head of delivery for Candidate ID. It is an almost sunny Glasgow day. We're excited to be today talking about the growth of the contingent workforce and the changes that need to be made. I'm delighted to be joined by my guest today, Bhumi. Bhumi, would you like to introduce yourself? Would you like to tell us a little bit about your business and your background within recruitment?
Absolutely, Billy. Firstly, thank you so much for the introduction into the weather. We've got actually a little bit sunnier day here. We beat you. But yes, so I'm Bhumi. I'm the founder and CEO of IntierMarket, which is an end-to-end technology solution for businesses, so enterprises and our partners, which would typically be managed services and RPOs, to be able to build their independent talent clouds and manage them end-to-end, from sourcing to contract and offer management to compliance and payment. And the reason InteriMarket started is because I have over 9.5 years experience as a contractor within the UK. So I've been a temp, I've been a contingent worker, I've been an independent contractor consultant, and I've worked within HR and recruitment teams and within RPOs, where I've seen not only just the two sides of a talent and a business, but also what goes on in the complex process of sourcing to managing a contractor within businesses, and the sheer frustration of what goes on behind the scenes is what drove us to build IntierMarket.
Fantastic. And then, of course, the contingency market has changed so much. Certainly, I've worked in recruitment since 2005. The business I worked for, we had very few contractors, if any at all. Yeah, we had a decent temp desk, certainly, but the whole contingency model, particularly with the trend towards self-employment, not just in the technology industry, which is obviously traditionally where the higher volume was, but over to engineering, to building services, and then of course into the gig economy, and then to driver roles, delivery roles, and that type of thing, means that the market has changed significantly. And I think a really fascinating stat that you told me when we caught up yesterday was that, compared to 10 years ago, when 3% of the market, the employment market, was contingency workforce, it's now 20%. What's your viewpoint on where's the, why has that change or that growth in the market, has that impacted candidates positively? Has it impacted candidates negatively? Where do you see how has that really hit potential candidates, either candidates who are in the market already, in the contingent market, or candidates who are thinking about moving into the market?
Few things there. The first one is that, yes, the market has changed significantly in terms of now, on average, about 20% of the UK population is contracting or contingent of some nature. And the reason that happened, or started to happen, from sort of 2008 was purely due to the financial crash. So businesses and enterprises realized that they needed more flexible working or workforce, and so did talent and people that were forced into redundancies and restructures that actually quite enjoyed, and most of them, if we think about it, about 10 years ago, were in their sort of late 30s, early 40s, were quite experienced, came out as interims. And so they really started to enjoy the lifestyle. So now what's happened over a decade is that the talent is really driving this change. At one spectrum, we have these really experienced contractors and interims who really enjoy the change. And some of the key things that's driving it is their personal work-life balance, is the need to work only certain amounts, and those things. And then the second thing is the drive of younger generations that are coming into the workforce. I hate to use millennials and sort of box people in, but the general trend is that people want more flexibility. People are desiring upskilling and reskilling a lot more than they used to do about 15 years ago, because people wanted more stability back then. And now they like to trust the brands they work with. They want to be able to engage directly, etc. So there are a few things that have really driven this change in the market. It's not just the business need, but it was almost an opportunity, about a decade ago, that people got to experience this new way of working and living. which has worked for majority people.
Is it not really just a perception though that a lot of this growth has been driven by a desire from candidates to have a lifestyle change, rather than it being simply what perhaps it originally drove it, which was an excuse for employers to employ people on contracts with minimum employment law responsibility. Is it is it genuinely the case that people do this because of lifestyle, or are they being forced into a corner to do it because employers don't want to take on full-time permanent responsibility for their staff?
There is, again, that could be dependent on the sector. And this is where sectors are very important. So, for example, if we look at Brexit at the moment, construction sector is going through massive changes. They recently struggled with project delivery, timely delivery, and that's all down to lack of having the right teams and the right people, white or blue collar, in the projects to make them happen. So there are certain sectors where I think talent is forced into considering alternate options of employment, but then generically speaking, it's mostly us people. Like, we're driving the change as talent. We're driving that change because we see the benefits of that flexibility. And so this is what I did for 9.5 years. I got into temp jobs, but then I actually preferred fixed time contracts or independent contracting or consulting, purely because the variety of the projects, the amount of things I got to learn, and the speed of progression. So for me, I could easily take 2 months out in between projects to work on something personal, which I really preferred. So I think there is a lot of preference, depending on the sectors, though.
Absolutely, and I think we clearly see where people are fortunate enough to be in, make the difference, I suppose, between almost white collar and blue collar, and trades, and skilled and unskilled labour. I think there's definitely a divide in the market, unfortunately, where people who are working in unskilled positions. Well, we've seen that. We won't name, any company names, but we all know what's going through the courts and in terms of testing of employment conditions and stuff. And I think there's probably individuals who are blue collar or professionals perhaps have the benefit of being paid, yes, a higher rate. They've got the benefit of being able to take professional advice from, they've got accountants, they're using, good umbrella companies and that type of thing in order to make sure that they're well protected and well guarded against any of the risks that come out. On the risk side, so we've obviously got IR35 going, that's starting to impact now, or certainly is coming into effect and hitting every sector just now. Are you seeing any impact of IR35 on the market? Do you expect that this is going to start reducing the number of contractors in the market, or do you think it's just simply a bit of over-governance with regards to contractors?
I feel that IR35 is quite unnecessary. It is just too much over-governance, over-regulation. It's like one of those things, when you have too much rules and regulations, you sort of impact the innovation that comes out of individuals. So I think firstly it is overly regulated, but I also think that IR35 in the public sector potentially helps those rogue teams and businesses who get away with hiring the same people and trying to avoid permanent offers, etc. So it definitely helps in certain contexts. But as I said, there is a mixture of having too much, which I think the UK government is moving towards with IR35, and I do not agree to it. In terms of, this is speculation whether the numbers are declining or not. We still see a lot of people still choosing to opt contracting. I receive at least 8 to 10 messages a day to sort of ask that they're in permanent jobs, they've been having 20 years experience, 30 years experience, how do they move that into, contracting career, etc. And it's fascinating how, so many people are still interested, and actually it is on the growth. So despite IR35, I do not feel that it drastically reduces what a contractor can earn. It just regulates it too much. And then it makes a sort of a level playing field. It's almost like having fixed term contract after fixed term contract instead of having permanent job for 10 years. Is my opinion anyway.
And yeah, absolutely, and I can see that. I think there's having, I've never actually been a contractor, unlike you, but when IR35 first came out, I was working for a recruitment agency. I remember reading the documentation. I remember going through the testing and thinking to myself, though, when I went through the test that was online, and I don't know whether the test has changed much since then, but remember thinking, God, it must be really hard to actually, genuinely demonstrate that you are a contractor. And certainly my training was as an accountant. Actually, and I remember we used to go through, combine HR with the accountancy side in order to try and validate whether someone could technically be an employee or whether they were, it was that whole difference between a contract for services and a contract for employment and that type of thing as well. And I remember thinking with IR35, it must be really hard to genuinely prove that you are going to be a contractor, because as Barry has said, Barry, thanks for joining us today. Quite rightly, we should be protecting against disguised employment, for the taxation benefits. We do want to make sure that the revenue coming in from income tax is the correct revenue. Make sure that people aren't avoiding income tax and national insurance obligations. Just simply because they're able to manipulate their employment status. So without IR35, how can we protect against disguised employment, as Barry's saying?
I think without IR35, it's very much about just regulating and the hiring teams being genuine. And I think this is a more deep-rooted business and cultural challenge than a particular talent-related challenge. Because, if a business or a team feels that they can save a little bit of money or they can do that, they would certainly take those actions. So this is more of a business culture change that would be required ethically, to operate in an ethical space more than, I think, a legal requirement. But I see why IR35 has come in play. I just think that pushing it to private sectors, etc., is going to curb innovation, is going to curb self-employment, potentially. And this is a speculation, although having said that, I haven't seen that in numbers yet. I think people are still very excited about being able to get that flexibility, which is very, very key in anybody you speak to these days. They're like, yeah, I'm thinking about contracting in the next few years or whatever. I've heard very few people say that they're going to be permanent for the rest of their life.
Fantastic. So let's talk about the differences between sectors then. From your perspective, we've got self-employed, we've got contingent workforce, as I said, in everything from low unskilled labour through to highly specialised professions. Is there any similarities between how we actually successfully manage the contingent workforce across that massive breadth of roles that are actually available? Is there any patterns? Is there any advice that you can give to employers when managing? Because there's employers certainly that we work with at Candidate ID who are both employing self-employed drivers, for example, but then they're also hiring senior finance executives. In fact, one of our clients has got an interim CEO just now who which is contingent workforce as well. So how can you first of all, broad stroke, what advice would you give to employers in order to manage their contingent workforce and get the best out of it before we perhaps talk about the differences between
So I'm going to be really bold and say this, is that every business needs to stop saying this is how we've done it and it works for us. Because the biggest challenge today that employers are facing is that they're so used to operating like they used to 15 and 25 years ago when contingent numbers were so small. The complex processes created about 15 years or 20 years or 25 years ago, including the technology like VMSs that come with that, were brilliant at the time when the numbers were smaller. Now, as we see the need for contingent workforce increasing, not only from a business perspective, but also from a talent perspective, those things need to change. So when I speak to businesses and they say, we've always done it this way and we're okay for now because we've got complex processes sorted with 10 different providers and technology pieces and it's working. It's broken, but it's working and I don't want to touch it. Firstly, you will have to touch it at some point, because the rate of growth will make it unsustainable. Yes, the UK may not grow as quickly as the US is changing in terms of that, but it will catch up. We always catch up here in the UK to the trends that happen in the US, you know.
What are the typical problems? So as a business starts to grow, so let's say, for example, you've got let's say we've got a software business, so we'll keep it close to home. So we are a couple of years down the line, say that we've got 200 staff. Let's say that 30% of our workforce, our development workforce, are contingent, but we all of a sudden realise that we need to go from having a contingent workforce of around about 60 right up to 200. As I start to grow that, what typically would the problems be that you would expect to see when I go from 60 contractors
so
to 200
typically, when you're a
contractors?
small business, you are working either directly with contractors and paying them directly. And as soon as you start to see that scale, you will start to involve third parties like staffing agencies, who would then not only source and secure that talent for you, but also offer and manage that talent for you. Now, that third party could be one person, like a managed services, which is a lot more cost effective in today's world than several staffing agencies. And because what they then do is each and every one of them will have different set of terms with you, anything from 15% to 25% in total of what your budget is for the contractor workforce. So if you can imagine, you've almost added a third of your cost to just your budget. So if you had budget for 200 people, you've now actually got to find the cost for management of all of that. So in effect, it's 25% more than what you have. Right.
But isn't that 25%? Isn't that a good additional amount to pay to ensure that your contractors are effectively getting managed correctly? It takes that worry away from you. You know that the relationship is being managed correctly by a recruitment agency or business. Isn't that a fee that's worth paying?
If we lived in an ideal world and that happened. What currently happens is, with that margin that you're paying, you're actually not getting engaged talent. Staffing agencies have a very subtle reputation of, using talent as a commodity. In fact, a recent survey, and that I'm going to read, which is the Trust in Recruitment survey that was done in partnership with a couple of the businesses, they said that about 90% of talent do not trust staffing agencies have their best interest at heart. So what we're seeing is there is a lack of trust. There is a clear lack of value add, which is very, very key. Now, when you have 3% of your population, which is contingent, so 60 people, it's okay because you're trying to manage some directly, you're trying to engage some directly. Then you're relying on multiple third parties to manage this for you. And depending on the agency or depending on the third party, they're either being managed really well or they're being managed really poorly. How that affects you is that your brand is affected, because at the end of the day, what matters in this day and age and moving forward will be engagement, inclusion, and retention of that talent, right? So why would you want to do that when you now, especially now, we have technology like IntierMarket that can facilitate that at almost half the cost, if not.
So I'm going to defend the agency side a little bit here, because my background is agency. So I started in 2005. So I'm going to I tend not to sit in the fence when it comes to this stuff. For me as a recruiter, when I was hiring temps and contractors, I'm spending a lot of time, first of all, building up the relationships with those individuals in advance, so that if you were the client, Bhumi, if you come to me all of a sudden, and this is what happened, I worked in financial services. So I've got some of the major banks coming to me. In fact, one in particular who had a massive mortgage business based in Glasgow, that would come and say, we need a mortgage underwriter to start tomorrow, Billy. So, for me, I've spent the time, just keeping in touch. Even at that point, even though that was 13 years ago, I'm still using marketing, still using email marketing to keep in touch with these individuals. I've identified them, not through LinkedIn at that time, but through my referral network. So I've spent the time to make sure that the client that I'm working with, if they so happen to have, that underwriter vacancy coming in, because I know roughly what's going to happen, isn't that a massive part of what you're paying an agency or paying an RPO for, rather than I get the relationship management side, and I think I'll come back to that in a little bit, but bit more. But how? Yeah, okay, you may be using a solution like a fantastic solution like yourself. You're going to reduce costs, the administration costs of dealing with that candidate once they're on board. But what about the step before, about actually finding and sourcing those prospective candidates?
So RPOs do not, so RPOs and managed services are not part of the third parties we're talking about, that replacing with automation and IntierMarket, firstly. And secondly, so there are two different camps, right? You're dealing with a senior contractor, right? And majority of the businesses are doing volume contracting. When you're dealing with volume contractors, the agencies do not operate in the same level of ethical fashion. Now, even let's talk about the example you gave, right? So you've spoken with 100 people you've got on your bench, you know that they're right for this position. And if the employer or the business gave you an open range of day rates, etc., you will typically, just from your personal perspective, from a commission point as well, go and pick the one that's highest costing, right? So
I don't know about that. I just think that there might be some of them are certainly from my perspective. I'm going to always that's something I've always prided myself in recruitment. I'll find the person that's right for the job, not the person who's going to make me the most commission. You know, that's I would challenge that actually, and I think being perfectly honest, I think that's a view that comes from skeptical candidates actually, as opposed to genuinely in reality what actually happens.
So the data that we have, over 1,000 contractors or over 1,000 candidates, suggest that. So how much confident are you? How many percentage of recruiters act like you on the agency side? Let me just ask you that question.
Certainly, I honestly, in my agency days, I worked with probably, out of, say, I probably worked with about 150 recruiters over the time, and I would probably say about 2 or 3 of them were people that I would say would increase their fees, or would attempt to increase their commission based on salary. That would probably be it. The remainder that I worked with were people who were genuinely interested in getting the right people for the right job. Perhaps I just worked for a really good agency. Perhaps I was unique, but certainly in my experience, and based on my experience with candidates, it's something that doesn't happen that often.
Absolutely. Then that has to be a very unique experience, because I've been a contractor as well. In the past, in the last 4 years of my consulting career, I stopped using agencies. And in fact, to a point, and it may really depend on the brand, and we were having this discussion and debate last week, where we said not all agencies are bad, not all recruiters are bad, but depending on the firm and establishment you work for, there is a lot of pressure on numbers. And when that happens, contractors specifically get used as commodities. So I've got a higher day rate for that person, and I can make a little bit more extra margin, and I will do that. And this is not just a perception, this is experience. So when I would go into a program role, and then I would realize that actually I've been told a certain day rate, but there is £100 gone out of my day rate, without me even being told about it, then that becomes an experience more than a perception. I've worked with brilliant interim executive search folks as well, but as I said, that really depends on the position and the sort of seniority of role. As you get more senior, or as you get more niche, you find better talent or better recruiters in that space. But from a volume perspective, which is majority of the businesses, you do not find that. So that's literally what the numbers are saying. And I'm not saying that all recruiters are bad. Don't take me wrong. I do love recruiters. I have been one in-house myself and for an RPO. But we also know the number of, the pressure and the number of times we've had to forget about diversity and inclusion, or forget about who the right talent was, because that person would fit with the hiring manager. And as a recruiter, especially as an agency recruiter, you do not want to upset your hiring manager, because that does hinge on your business, right? So there are many times, and 8 out of 10 agency recruiters have told us in person, have told us and said, off the record, yeah, I would provide the short list that's going to make me money. So,
Cool. So the diversity inclusion part's really interesting. So how do you support your clients that you work with to improve their diversity inclusion or meet their diversity agenda through a sourcing strategy then, for example? So how do you make sure that when they do require contractors and they're utilising your platform, how do you make sure that their diversity the agenda is
so
met?
when a talent signs up on the platform or when they're invited by an employer, we basically get them to fill in a diversity form. We do not display that. However, what our sourcing, one of the key things that our machine does is it matches like for like people. Right. So and within contracting specifically, I've raised this in the past, that we have very few women within contracting. It's mainly driven by men. And so I'm always sort of talking about more women becoming contractors and, representing their skills, especially for returned mums from maternity and things. It's a brilliant career to come back into contracting. Yeah. So what we do is
Do you think that trend with women, the lack of women, is because of the industries? Because historically, and certainly in the past 10 years, a vast, substantial portion of the contingent workforce has been technology roles, for example. Do you think it's driven by industry, or do you think there's less females who are contracting for other reasons?
One of the key things that we've found in our studies that we've conducted with women is usually the lack of confidence. So there are tons and tons of women who work in IT as well. Yes, lower in proportion and in ratio, but majority of them do not want to go contracting purely because of lack of confidence of asking a day rate, which they feel they're not qualified for.
So it comes back to the salary negotiation side. So we do know through studies that women are absolutely probably worth more than men, if certainly at least equal to men anyway. And in my case, most of the time they're always worth more. They always add far more than what we do. But it comes down to that confidence thing, the ability, as we've seen through studies, or the confidence of women to actually negotiate what is a fair salary, based as opposed to the industry. So that's a pattern that is both applicable in contract salaries and permanent salaries as well in your experience.
So what our machine does is, in terms of diversity and inclusion, is literally when an employer clicks find someone similar on Joe Blogs because she's a brilliant HR transformation person, we would then bring up profiles from a skills perspective that are similar. We do not consider gender. We do not consider certain things that don't need to be considered. We only match them specifically based on the full skills DNA, which is where I think we're sort of helping tackle that, because for sure in my experience, as I've said, I have sometimes my CV's been pushed under the shortlist, and purely because I don't match what the hiring manager would want, from a look and a talk perspective.
Fantastic. And is that work that you do with clients across the full spectrum of diversity? So any diversity programs that they have in place, whether it's gender or ethnicity or anything like that, is that something that your platform does and what you're able to
absolutely,
to advise
we provide the data. We're a pure tech player, so usually our MSP and RPO partners will have the human element to it, so managing relationships, making sure their shortlists are D&I inclusive, etc. So we don't actively take part. And if I do end up meeting an enterprise customer who either wants to take it in-house, then I will still refer them to my MSP or RPO partner to help them set up that in-house capability, especially for small to medium-sized enterprises. We have a list of partners and MSPs who would basically be able to help and give that human services element. Because currently we're a pure tech player and we're only focused on automation and a lot of deep learning. So to really help replace some of the boring admin-y repeat manual tasks,
The stuff is, as you say, that it needs a person to do it, and it costs money as a result. And ultimately, we if we can replace those admin functions, then I suppose there's two facets. In an ideal world, we want to make sure that people are doing roles that are adding value, as opposed to to just doing admin, but as you say, ultimately it'll end up saving money anyway. Let's look at it then post employment. So once somebody's actually employed, and then perhaps someone, if I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday who's just finished a contract, he's a sourcer. He was there, I think, 7 months. He's now just finished. He's went on to his next contract. So how would you? What's your opinion in terms of how you maintain that relationship with your contingent workforce to improve the chances of them potentially returning to work with you again?
The typical case we've found in terms of what goes on in the sector right now is that businesses would either collate that data on an ATS system and in hopes of we'll keep in touch every 6 months with an email, generic email or something like that. Or if it's RPOs and MSP partners, they have a lot of volume work as well. So they're not always able to keep in touch with this talent, but they have somewhere, again, them sitting somewhere on a VMS or an ATS of the client. So typically, if we speak about engagement after the contract is finished, it's nil in terms of existence because it is manual, right? So unless you're a recruiter who is keeping in touch with them, that's very different to the team that you worked with. You know, most of the interims or contractors will not be in touch with their past employers. So at IntierMarket, the solution for that is that we've literally enabled businesses so everybody that is currently a contractor or was past contractor can basically be added to that talent cloud of past contractors. So they can basically keep in touch, and then we send them engagement, jobs, etc. In terms of what is relevant for that particular talent. And so what happens is that because the talent is engaged and they've been able to secure pipeline work through the platform because of various other businesses, they're more likely to update their details, to keep in touch. And we also automate a lot of the candidate profiling, which means that if they have secured another position, we will automatically update their availability, their rates, their skills. So if you're a company, you go into your past contractor pool and you say, oh, wow, Joe Bloggs was HR transformation, but now she's actually doing systems implementation at this company and she's available in 3 months' time. You can see that because we've automatically updated that bit of information. And so if you wanted to rehire somebody in 3 months' time, you've got that information right in front of you whilst they're still being very subtly engaged. So we don't want to piss them off, but we do want to engage with them as well.
Absolutely, you're talking from exactly the same hymn sheet that we talk. You know, it's about that ongoing relationship management, and it's something that you know we push through our platform and advise and give consultancy on to our clients. Also, people like Bill Boorman, that's what he pushes. You know, we're in an age because of the growth of contingency where the employers who are going to be able to secure the best talent at the right time for their needs, they're going to do that because they've managed to maintain relationships with their prospects, because their prospective candidates. Let's face it, it's something I talk about. A lot of our clients are business to business clients. They are not the most exciting clients in the world. They're not the sexiest in the world, and a massive proportion of contractors will be working with businesses like that. You know, it's about, you know, how, if you've got someone who you would hire again, you know, how do you make sure, and in my view, it's about how do you make sure that they're not only kept in touch. I think you're right along the job side, you know, and keeping them up to date on that side. But what we encourage our clients to do is talk to those people, those potential future hires, about what's exciting in the business, what problems are being solved, particularly in a technologist. I was talking at the in-house tech talent conference last week, and from our research and the work that we do with our clients who are hiring technologists, do you know, the after salary, do you know, which is the number one thing that technologists are interested in, because we're really guilty as recruiters at hiding salary and package information. The next thing that they're interested in is, you know, is your product or service, is it interesting? Is it an interesting problem to solve? Do you know, is it something that's going to have an impact? And if you're as a business, if you're keeping in touch with you know, contractors who have worked with you before, you're telling them about what's going on, the new initiatives that are happening, you're going to keep people's interest. And like you say, it's not about spamming, it's not about pissing people off, it's not about sending them emails every week. It's about, it could be, do you know, in our experience, it could be once a month. as long as it's absolutely spot on, and actually as long as it also considers multiple channels, as long as it looks at email, as long as it looks at text message, as long as it's looking at social media as well, it works particularly well. Great. So Bobby, we've probably got about 5 or so minutes left. I'm going to encourage other people to who are in the conversation. I'm just seeing if there's any more questions, but there isn't at the moment. What other? So we've spoken about kind of pre-hire. We've spoken about the changes in the market there. We've talking about post-hire. What other changes in the contract market have you seen over the past 10 years, and how do you recommend that employers adapt to make sure that they are hiring and retaining the best contingent workforce that they can?
So one of the key things that I think is going to really, really help B2B businesses is to have access to data and have transparency throughout the process, which is where I also think staffing agencies lack to provide that. Like you just said, sometimes they hide the day rates, they falter the day rates, or salary information in your case when you mentioned. But it is not an uncommon practice to basically charge 15% to one client and 20% to the other because they haven't negotiated it or haven't had the time to negotiate and they've trusted their expertise. So I think businesses that are able to, push forward transparency within their organization and bring in a slight cultural shift where basically what they're saying is, we are wanting to take responsibility of this talent, because currently it's a quarter of our working population, which is still quite large. For an organization that is 1,000 people, it's 250 contractors, as an example. So it's quite a large population. So having that keenness and that requirement to actually start looking at the reports, start looking at the data. And so some of the things we do is we have tons and tons of reports from the number of contractors currently working with you to your past contractors, which could be about 10,000, although you've only got 200 working right now, and how we sort of help you build that talent cloud. Things like how quickly did you rehire somebody through the platform? Because currently, if you want to hire someone, regardless of whether you know that person or not, because you're not in touch with that person, and this is particularly true with hiring managers, they're like, oh, I worked with somebody 2 years ago. They'd be brilliant for this project, but they don't remember who that was. And one of our studies last year showed that over 60% hiring managers would like to rehire somebody they've already worked with because they trust them and they know them, but they simply do not have the tools or access to tools that can make it happen today. So they have to go back out to the agency or their internal process to go back out to their PSL, which is where I think the businesses can have this cultural shift and say, we're going to bring in something, whether it's our technology or whether it's just, a capability to actually start looking at the data, start looking at the reports. Because as this continues to evolve, and today we might say, okay, millennials are entering the middle management, like myself, borderline millennial, borderline annoying, but eventually more of us will be in our late 30s and early 40s, and we would want to start, building a longer term flexible portfolio career, which I've done, and which majority of my colleagues within my sort of age range I see wanting to do in 5 to 10 years time. So I think
I can't wait to go 3 days a week. I'm telling Adam, I've already started dropping the hints, about going, I don't want to work 5 days a week. How can I do that? So I'm gripping onto millennial for dear life. So I was born in 82.
Borderline. So I'm not that borderline. Borderline. But that's the whole point. And also, studies suggest that you don't have to be working 5 days a week to be successful and to be happy. In fact, if you work lesser, you're happier because you've got then the time to achieve your personal goals. And I think more and more of us are realizing that we're more mindful. We go to yoga. We do all sorts of things that 10, 20 years ago would be a bit juju kind of, if you know what I mean. So I personally think that, that businesses need to start adopting this cultural shift. They need to start becoming more flexible. And if they could adopt technology along the way, that really helps them solve a problem, not just today, but in 2020 and in 2025, they should really look into doing that.
Yeah, and Mark, just in the comment section, he's made a really good point. Most people work 4 days a week and 4 days in a 5-day week, and I couldn't agree more. You know, you look at the studies that are going on in places like Sweden right now in terms of dropping the week. In fact, there's a fantastic business based in Glasgow called what are they called these days? The travel design agency, I think they're called. They used to be called Dojo Marketing. Chris Torres, a friend of mine, and about 2 years ago, they moved from they didn't reduce the number of working days, but they've reduced their working day. You know, they've went from an 8-hour day to I think it's a 5.5-hour day, and they just work in they just time manage. You know, they work in really concise sprints. They work in 25-minute chunks. They have a 30-minute lunch break. You know, and people are finishing at 3 p.m. You know, they're coming in at 9:30, finishing at 3, and as you say, they can, you know, instead of, you know, doing what most of us are still doing, unfortunately, working maybe 8 till 6, 9 till 6, or whenever, going home, taking care of all your personal responsibilities at night, like cleaning the house and doing the cooking and looking after the cats and all that kind of stuff as well. They're able to fit that all in and have the evening to themselves. So there's a couple of different ways that it can be achieved. Do you think that's going to be just to wrap up, we can think now about the future of the contingent workforce actually moving forward in terms of your predictions. Do you think that the biggest change in contingent is going to be the number of people who are moving into contingency work? Do you think that's still going to be the biggest change, or do you think there's any other changes that are going to heavily influence this market over the next 10 years?
I think the business's bottom line is going to affect this as well. So I'll take an example in construction sector. Right. So currently it is very, very expensive, not just from a cost perspective, but from a speed perspective. And we've seen some disasters already this year in terms of construction projects not delivered, companies going bust, etc. in the UK, just as an example. So what is happening is the lack of the right teams in the right place in the speed they need is basically affecting their revenues, their margins, and potentially their business credibility. So there will be a huge push from the businesses as well, especially the businesses that are forward thinking, the leaders that are happy to shift and change the culture because they've seen in the last 10 years they've had to be a bit more agile and happy to adopt this spectrum of workforce, internal, external, agile teams, project-based teams, etc. It's those sorts of businesses that are actually starting to proactively move in that direction that is going to drive a lot of this change as well. So yes, we have humans, individuals, talent that are naturally moving in that direction. I mean, you can see how many online businesses we have in this day and age, right? So many freelancers, but obviously freelancers are not right for enterprises. And so it is going to be a combination of both businesses moving as well as contingent talent wanting to move in that direction.
Here's something I've never, like I say, I've never been a contractor. I've always been an employee. And something that I was thinking about last night when I was thinking about this and thinking about trends was thinking, are we going to get into a situation? So right now, if I look at professional contingency markets, so if I put the unskilled and potential blue collar work to the side for a little second, if we think about day rate contractors are still charging a premium compared to the permanent equivalent, significant in some cases, double, triple what the permanent equivalent salary will be. As we move towards a workforce that is more heavily comprised of contingent workers, is this going to claw back salaries, do you think? Do you think that contingent salaries will reduce and become more like their permanent salaries as that goes on?
Firstly, I think it's a perception when people think that contingent can charge double, or if not 3 times more than a permanent salary person. That's a myth. Let's bust that first. So interims may have a premium of 10 to 20% max, and that's purely to cover holidays, sickness times, etc. Most interims, even on day rates, will not be charging. If you consider a permanent person's training, salary, package, bonus, holidays, sickness, etc., then in comparison, they're not charging double. Right. And so we're already starting to see that paradigm shift. We're already starting to see more and more with this IR35 or with some of the things that HMRC has done is crushing more and more contractors' day rates anyway. right? So we will see that. However, what we will also see in terms of a shift is that more and more businesses will need project-based teams. So regardless of whether they're all paid equally, which might happen and which is not a bad thing, but as long as they can cover the holiday and sickness for everybody, and this will then become something that the businesses will have to undertake, potentially, like a massive shift at some point, because they will have to rely more on project-based teams rather than permanent or just contractors. And so project-based teams, if we look at this is why the whole functionality of project-based teams within IntierMarket comes in play, is that even if someone's an internal permie or an external contractor, they will have to form part of a project. And so more and more individuals and businesses will drive towards project-based mentality.
So that's a really interesting point, and something that's probably, in fact, I was reading the one that comes to mind straight away, just because I was reading his book recently. I was reading Anthony Bourdain, the chef who unfortunately passed away earlier in the year. His book about the hospitality industry, and about how he used to take teams of chefs, even from when he started his career. Chefs would move, about with him. So he'd have a core team of at some points 4 or 5 people who would move from restaurant to restaurant with them. And certainly in my experience, it was something that happened within the financial services market, actually with financial advisors, where we would move teams of people along. I know it obviously happens in trades and labour as well. So do you see that something that's going to become very, very common then within the more professional contingency market, within the more technical
I think
contingency
that will
markets?
happen regardless of skilled or unskilled labour, because, as I said, that will be a push that businesses will require. If not by 2020, then by 2022 onwards, purely because of the business needs, is how I vision it anyway. And that's what we're preparing InteriMarket to sort of, by 2020, have the vision of facilitating that whole project piece. So not only today we're an end-to-end contingent worker piece, but we want to move into that space where we can actually support project-based requirements.
Fantastic. But mate, it's been an absolute pleasure. I've really enjoyed that chat. It's given me some insight into an area that I've not really had much experience in for a couple of years. So genuinely, thank you so much for joining us today and taking part in our talent talk. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. We will send out the video to everyone afterwards, so that you can watch it back. It will, of course, be available on our website, www.canadaid.com, and also our Facebook channel. I've also put Bhumi's contact information there. Please do connect with her. She'll be delighted to answer any questions that you have that we didn't manage to cover today, and I've got the email address there for you as well. So thank you again, everyone. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day and enjoy the rest of your week. Thanks very much.